You are now listening to Playbook Radio. Here is your host, Martin Williams.
And welcome to Playbook Radio. My name is Martin Williams. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. You may do so on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. All the links to the podcast can be found at gameplanplaybook.com. That's gameplanplaybook.com. So today what I wanted to talk to you about is how overthinking can wreck your life. So I'm a master at overthinking, and the earliest memory I have of overthinking started in middle school. And when we moved to a new area in Northern Virginia, and I had to adjust to a new environment, a new school, a new group of kids I didn't know. I didn't make friends easily. And in fact, I didn't make many friends at all for a number of years. And, I can probably get into that in another podcast, but, I had to deal with being bullied and teased and everything else. And, I know I'm not the only kid that ever went through that. So certainly not looking for any sympathy, but it's just something that I handled with overthinking, because I never really dealt with what I was going with the school. And, therapy wasn't really as mainstream as it is now. So I stayed in my head, and I stayed in my head for a long time. That, it was safe there, and I didn't really have to be anything other than what I was in my head. Now, as an adult, and I'm sure you know this too, we all know that staying in your head is not really conducive to long-term success, and certainly not conducive to productivity. And in the area of performance, most underperformers stay in their head, whether they're athletes or executives or just the average 9-to-5 person. They stay in their head, and as a result, they overthink. Okay, and so overthinking is I think some people have a very non-extreme view towards overthinking. They feel that overthinking is normal and everyone does it. So what's the big deal? But I want to make sure that you understand that overthinking is not normal, and it's not something that you want to hold on to long term. And I look at it as a wrecking ball. It can destroy your life, and it can destroy your life in ways that you don't really understand at the time. But over time, you see the results. You see what it can do. You see the wake of overthinking. The main reason that I look at overthinking as a wrecking ball is because you waste your most valuable resource, which is time. And you waste it 1 minute at a time. So you don't even realize you're doing it in the moment. Okay. So how are some ways that overthinking can wreak havoc? The first place is at your work or in your business. So things that you should have been doing or should have been done for the longest time don't ever get started because you thought about it for days, weeks, months, and you did nothing, right? And overthinkers with a business, oftentimes they think themselves out of profits, they think themselves out of opportunities because they either can't decide or can't muster up the courage to execute, or they can't, some mix of the two. It's either indecision or lack of action, and then they end up doing nothing. And there's so many entrepreneurs, and I'm entrepreneur, right? Who have many courses, have many pieces of content, have all these ideas on their Google Drive or on their phone that never see the light of day because they overthink. At school, your assignments are late or they don't get done because your mind is in overdrive. You're just thinking, going all the time. It's going all the time. You're processing all the time. and you haven't prepared for your exams. You haven't even started your papers, and those papers get done at the last minute. Your exams, you study at the last minute, and you might get away with it for a little while, but eventually it catches up to you. And the third way is relationships. Overthinkers have full on conversations in their head and not with the people that they need to talk to, right? A lot of married people who are overthinkers talk to their spouse in their head instead of like an actual person. And so things that you need to say to that other person often go unsaid because it's safe in your head and you stay in your head. So you talk about it in your mind, but you don't talk about it with the person, right? And relationships, communication is like blood to a relationship. So when you don't communicate, relationships tend to die. So what's the cure? What's the answer, right? It's giving you a lot of negative outcomes. So what's the cure to all this? Unfortunately, your mind is not going to stop thinking. You're not, and we don't want it to do that. We don't want your mind to stop thinking. We want your mind to flourish, right? But you got to give it boundaries. Just like a 3-year-old, you can't leave a 3-year-old to their own devices. We have a dog, and he is going on 2 years old. And so we have been letting him go out without his leash to, handle his business. And he was doing pretty good. And then the other day I let him out and he basically just took off, right? He's off to the races. And, at that time I was trying to get my daughter to school. So I really didn't have time to be chasing a small dog around our complex, but there I was, right? And a lot of times our minds are like that. Our minds can just take off and go into a completely different direction. And if you don't give your mind boundaries, if you don't give your mind constraints, you are not going to have the type of clear thinking that you need to have. So how can you help this? How can you, heal overthinking, or at least help it to not do it as much as you normally do? The first way you help it is to decide, okay? A lot of people who overthink have trouble making decisions, and they live in indecision as a result. So if there's something that you've been needing to decide to do, whether it's a small decision of, where to get your hair cut or hair done, or, where to take your unwanted items, or if it's a big decision like moving or a new job or something like that, sit down and make a decision, because the longer that decision is unmade, the longer you stay in indecision, you build up, basically a lot of thought, but you're not taking action, right? Your mind is continuing to over process instead of making a decision. So set a time period, set a deadline to make that decision, and then move in that direction. And if you have to pivot, if you have to reassess, then do that. But don't sit on decisions for too long. Make a decision and then move forward. The second thing you want to do is that you want to think on paper. You want to take everything out of your head and put it on paper. Your head is a maze of ideas, fantasies, and other stuff that we're not going to talk about. You can't really perform at your best in a mental environment like that. If you have a mental environment where you're thinking 1,000 things in 10 minutes, you're not going to be able to focus. You're not going to be able to perform the way that you need to perform with your brain in that type of pattern. So put everything on paper, um, all the things that you need to do, all the things that you want to do, put it on paper, do regular brain dumps. I would say weekly brain dumps are very helpful to take everything out of your head, put it on paper. A lot of stuff doesn't need to be acted on. Some things you can put it on paper and then just throw it away. But other things, other ideas, you can put it on paper and then strategize it and take action where appropriate. And that leads me to the third thing, which is to write out and plan as many tasks as possible. One of the things that I've been able to do that has helped me with overthinking is basically writing out everything that I need to do for that day. So whether it's my job, whether it's my business, I do my best to write out as much of my plan and my task as possible and then go off of that because my brain needs something to focus on. It's just how it is, right? But if and when I do that, and I do it more often than ever these days, it's an antidote to confusion. It's an antidote to a lack of focus, because if you're going to focus, you need something to focus on. So my plan acts as a point of focus. It's like a locus of focus, right? So you focus on the plan, right? And then follow the plan and follow the steps. And it orders my mind. It calms my mind down. And I'm able to, basically get a lot more done because I'm not overthinking too much, right? So the fourth thing is to execute, right? So overthinkers have a to-do list a mile long, okay? And when you make executing the goal and not be so tied to result, you start to rack up those wins and you start to clear your mind and you start to look back instead of looking back at regrets and saying, I wish I would have took action. I wish I would have did this. You can look back and say, hey, I executed on that. I put that course out. I put that product out. I contacted that prospect. I had that conversation with my loved one, and you can begin to start feeling more accomplished as opposed to feeling, like I said, feeling regrets because you didn't do the things that you needed to do because of overthinking. So I want you to think about what are some ways that you battle overthinking. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, comment, leave a comment and let me know about, what you do to overcome overthinking. But thank you so much for listening. My name is Martin Williams, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to Playbook Radio. If this episode helped you, please share it with family and friends. For more about Playbook strategies, please go to GameplanPlaybook.com.